The gentle hum of the dishwasher was usually the loudest sound in my apartment after Lily, my granddaughter, was tucked into bed. It was a comforting rhythm, a sign of a peaceful evening winding down in Oakmont, Pennsylvania. At 48, I'd found a quiet contentment here, raising Lily in the sprawling complex that had once, years ago, felt like a cage of frustration. That previous experience, a bitter chapter involving a different nightmare neighbor and an indifferent management, had been a wound that never quite healed. It was a primary reason why I was so fiercely protective of this new sanctuary. I had promised myself and the quiet ghost of my past that I would never again be driven from a home I loved by someone else's malice. This time, the peace had lasted a glorious 4.5 years. Lily was blossoming, her laughter echoing through rooms that once felt empty. My little sanctuary was truly that, a place of safety, warmth, and predictability. My days revolved around Lily's school, her playdates, and the simple joys of watching her grow. I was Corrine Hayes, and I was content. Then Mrs. Gable moved in, 2 doors down. The first sign was subtle, an oddness that I initially brushed off as eccentric old age. She was an elderly woman, perhaps in her late 70s, with a perpetually sour expression that deepened when she thought no one was looking. Her eyes, though, were sharp, always darting, as if cataloging every detail of the hallway. I'm an empathetic person by nature, and I tried to be neighborly, offering a smile, a brief wave. She rarely returned them. But it was more than just a lack of warmth. There was a peculiar intensity in her gaze, a kind of possessiveness over the shared space, as if she resented my very presence. I dismissed it. People are complex, I reminded myself. Maybe she's lonely. The first outright incident, though, was impossible to dismiss. It was a Tuesday afternoon, crisp and bright, and I was just loading Lily into her car seat in my sedan, which was parked directly outside our building. Mrs. Gable, who I had exchanged only a few brief, stilted pleasantries with, approached my car. She commented on how cute Lily was, her voice a little too saccharine, a little too close. I smiled politely, trying to project a sense of friendly but firm boundaries. I was about to close the car door when she leaned in, incredibly close to Lily's face, and said something I couldn't quite make out, a low murmur, almost a hiss, before straightening up with a peculiar, self-satisfied smirk. In an instant, Lily, who had been cooing happily, let out a piercing wail. It wasn't a fussy cry, it was a shriek of pure terror, heart-wrenching and immediate. My blood ran cold. "What did you do?" I demanded, my voice sharp with sudden panic, my hand instinctively going to Lily. Mrs. Gable simply blinked, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Oh dear, she must be tired," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, before turning and shuffling away, leaving Lily's terrified cries ringing in my ears. I spent the next 15 minutes trying to calm my hysterical granddaughter, my mind racing. What could she have done? What did she say? The incident left a deep, unsettling fear in my gut, the kind of fear only a grandparent protecting their child can truly know. This woman wasn't just eccentric, she was unsettling and potentially dangerous. This was the first concrete crack in my once unshakable peace, a promise of conflict to come. What would this strange woman do next? That incident was a jarring introduction, but it was only the prelude. The apartment complex had a strict non-smoking policy, a rule I appreciated, especially with Lily's developing lungs. But almost immediately after the car incident, a pungent, stale odor began seeping into our bathroom, particularly noticeable in the evenings. It was the unmistakable smell of cigarette smoke, thick and acrid, followed sometimes by the sweet, telltale scent of cannabis. Our bathroom vents, I quickly realized, were connected to Mrs. Gable's. I'm a patient person, and I believe in direct, polite communication first. So I knocked on Mrs. Gable's door, armed with a calm demeanor and a request. "Mrs. Gable," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I'm afraid I've noticed some smoke coming through the vents into my apartment. We have a non-smoking policy here, and with my granddaughter, it's really important for us to have clean air." Her face, usually so guarded, contorted into a mask of indignant fury. "I don't smoke," she practically shrieked, her voice raspy. "You're mistaken. How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" She slammed the door in my face before I could even formulate a response. The raw defensiveness, the blatant lie, confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't just an old woman with a bad habit. This was a woman who actively bristled at boundaries and would lie to maintain her chaotic sphere. My initial mild annoyance began to curdle into something colder, a dawning understanding that this was not a simple misunderstanding. This was a direct challenge. The smoke continued, of course, a constant, irritating reminder of her defiance. And then the disappearances began. At first, they were small, almost negligible. A package from an online order, confirmed delivered by the tracking, vanished from my doorstep. I shrugged it off as a delivery error or perhaps a porch pirate. Then a small decorative garden gnome, a silly gift Lily had given me for our porch, went missing. Later, a pair of gardening gloves I'd left on the railing. Each time, a tiny prick of suspicion, but nothing I could point a finger at. It was maddening, like trying to catch smoke. I tried to maintain my optimism, my sense of community. I truly valued our neighborhood, the friendly faces, the quiet streets of Oakmont. It was a place where I felt I had found purpose, a place I had fought to make home after my last ordeal. To have it threatened again by such petty, insidious acts was infuriating. I knew from my past that these small transgressions could quickly escalate. I knew that the moment you let someone like Mrs. Gable define the boundaries, you lost. I was determined not to lose this time. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. My patience, though deep, was not infinite. The daily routine of plugging my nose when I entered the bathroom, the subtle fear whenever a package was due, the constant low-level anxiety that permeated my home, it was wearing me down. My calm, resourceful nature was being tested, and a familiar sense of dread, the kind that had haunted me years ago, began to creep in. I felt Lily's innocence being chipped away by the underlying tension, and that was unacceptable. My core motivation to protect my family and maintain sanity in my home was under direct assault. I started documenting everything. I bought a small, discreet notebook and began logging every incident, the date, the time, the specific nuisance. The car incident with Lily, the smoke, the missing gnome, the gardening gloves. I was becoming a meticulous archivist of aggravation, my hand cramping from the precise entries. This was the patient part of my vengeful nature kicking in. I wouldn't lash out, I would build a case brick by agonizing brick. My first official step was to contact the apartment management office. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Henderson, the property manager, a perpetually harried man who always seemed on the verge of a coffee-induced aneurysm. I laid out my concerns calmly, presenting my neatly organized logbook. I detailed the smoking, the bizarre incident with Lily, the missing items. Mr. Henderson listened, nodding absently, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "Mrs. Hayes," he said when I finished, a practiced sigh escaping his lips, "we take all complaints seriously. But without concrete proof, our hands are tied. As for the smoking, we'll send out a general reminder to all tenants about the policy." He offered no solutions for the disturbing behavior, no interest in the impact on Lily. It was the same indifferent management I'd faced before, just a different face behind the desk. A wave of frustration, so potent it tasted metallic, washed over me. I left his office feeling dismissed, unheard, and thoroughly enraged. They had promised action, but I knew it was an empty promise. My resourceful mind immediately shifted gears. If they wouldn't act on my word, I'd give them something they couldn't ignore. The nuisances escalated, seemingly in direct response to my attempts at resolution. The smoking intensified, almost as if Mrs. Gable was blowing it directly into the vent as an act of defiance. Then came the constant traffic. Our complex had a strict parking permit policy, but Mrs. Gable's apartment became a revolving door of vehicles, parking illegally, blocking access, and creating a perpetual sense of chaos. Homeless individuals she allowed to set up camp in her designated parking spot further aggravated the situation. I'd find myself navigating around their makeshift shelters and their belongings just to get to my car. It was an invasion of the shared space, a blatant disregard for the rules that everyone else had to follow. I tried talking to other neighbors subtly at first. "Have you noticed anything odd about Mrs. Gable?" I'd ask, feigning casual curiosity. The responses were varied, but a pattern emerged. Many had their own stories of strange encounters, petty annoyances, or outright fear. One woman whispered about Mrs. Gable staring into her windows. Another spoke of loud, late-night arguments from her apartment. Everyone seemed to know she was a problem, but no one seemed to know what to do. There was a collective weariness, a resignation that paralleled my own past experience. It ignited my empathetic nature further. I couldn't let them or myself be subjected to this any longer. I swore I wouldn't just be driven out again. The thefts, once minor, became more brazen. Packages were ripped open and left on my doorstep, their contents gone. A new doormat vanished within days. The feeling of being watched, of my home being violated, became constant. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach every time I approached my door, every time I heard a rustle in the hallway. Lily, too, began to notice. "Grandma, where's our new mat?" she'd ask, her brow furrowed. I'd offer a vague explanation, trying to shield her, but I could feel her sense of security eroding. My blood boiled with a slow, simmering anger. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about the peace of my home, the innocence of my granddaughter. The breaking point arrived on Halloween. I had always loved Halloween. It was a time of pure joy for Lily, and I relished putting together elaborate treat bags for the neighborhood children. This year, I'd gone all out, full-sized candy bars, smaller assortments, bouncy balls, inflatable snakes, and even tiny tubs of Play-Doh. I had crafted nearly 24 bags, each a little treasure, and placed them in a large, festive basket on my porch, along with a clear sign printed in both English and Spanish. "Please take one bag." Lily, dressed as a shimmering unicorn, had bounced with excitement, watching from the window as the first few trick-or-treaters approached. It was a perfect Oakmont evening. Then the video captured it. I had purchased a Blink camera earlier that year, a relatively affordable security system that connected to my phone. I'd installed it after the string of package thefts, hoping it would deter the culprit. For weeks, the thieving had stopped. I'd begun to think the camera, or perhaps just Mrs. Gable's realization that I was taking active steps, had worked. I was wrong. The camera notification popped up on my phone, motion detected. I tapped it, a smile on my face, expecting to see a gaggle of costumed children. Instead, I saw Mrs. Gable. She shuffled onto my porch, her eyes, even in the grainy black and white of the night vision, seemed to fixate directly on my take one bag sign. She paused, then bent down not to take one, but to sweep her arms around the entire basket, gathering all of the carefully assembled treat bags into her embrace. My jaw dropped. The outrage was instantaneous, a hot, searing wave. But then, as she straightened up, a grotesque detail came into view. She wasn't wearing any pants. Her bare, wrinkled buttocks, pale and ghastly in the camera's monochromatic view, were exposed to the world as she waddled away, laden with my stolen generosity. I nearly gagged. It was a level of brazen, disgusting disregard that defied belief. I immediately shared the video with a few close friends on Facebook, not for legal action, but out of sheer disbelief and the need to process what I'd seen. Their horrified reactions and their immediate pointing out of her exposed posterior only solidified the grotesqueness of the act. My empathetic nature warred with a rising tide of pure disgust. This woman was not just a nuisance, she was a blight. I finally had irrefutable proof, and my patient vengeance was now fully engaged. This was no longer just about me. This was about justice, about proving that this woman couldn't just terrorize a neighborhood with impunity. This was the promise of a reckoning. What could management do now with undeniable video evidence? The police did nothing about the Halloween theft initially. I filed a detailed report citing Mrs. Gable by name, providing the video evidence. They called me back almost 40 days later, and we played a frustrating game of phone tag. Each time I called, I was shunted to a different officer, each one promising to follow up, none of them actually doing so. The legal system, it seemed, was as indifferent as the apartment management. I felt like I was screaming into a void, my hands tied, my perfectly documented evidence gathering dust on a desk somewhere. My frustration festered, turning into a deep, cold anger. My patience was being stretched to its absolute limits. Management, when I reported the Halloween incident to them, proved equally useless. Mr. Henderson simply sighed, said he'd look into it, and offered no practical solution. Then, as a final, almost insulting gesture, when my yearly lease renewal came up, they only increased my rent by 4% instead of their usual maximum of 10%. I didn't know if it was a tacit acknowledgement of the terrible neighbor, a pity concession, or just a random change, but it felt like a paltry offering in the face of the ongoing torment. It was a microscopic payoff that felt like a slap in the face. It certainly didn't change the core problem. The situation spiraled into a torment that permeated every aspect of my life. Sleep became a luxury, stolen in restless snatches, my ears constantly straining for sounds from Mrs. Gable's apartment. The muffled bass of loud music, the unfamiliar voices of her unapproved residents, the incessant creak of her door opening and closing. My mind was a whirlwind of worry, replaying incidents, strategizing, and then feeling the crushing weight of helplessness as each avenue proved fruitless. Lily started asking why we couldn't play outside on the porch anymore. She did pick up on my tension, her bright eyes clouding with an unspoken anxiety that tore at my heart. My own health began to suffer. Persistent headaches, a dull ache in my shoulders, and a constant, low-grade fever of anxiety became my unwelcome companions. The sense of being trapped was overwhelming. Rent availability in Oakmont was notoriously low, often hovering around a mere 2%, and any available rentals were far beyond my budget. I had spent 2 years actively looking, hoping to find a better situation, but to no avail. The thought of being forced out, of having to uproot Lily from the good neighbors she knew, from the vibrant community where I'd found purpose, was unbearable. It felt like history was threatening to repeat itself, a cruel echo of my past, where a similar neighbor had pushed me to the brink and management had stood idly by until I was forced to abandon my home. The bitterness of that memory was a raw, open wound. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about principle. This woman, Mrs. Gable, had been making people miserable in my unit, and likely others, for a long, long time. I couldn't let her chase me out, only for her to inflict the same misery on the next unsuspecting tenant. This was where my patient vengeance hardened into an unshakable resolve. The rock bottom wasn't a single event, it was the cumulative weight of daily torment, the emotional and psychological toll that was threatening to break me. But instead of breaking, it forged me. It clarified my purpose. I would not let this woman win. I would not let history repeat itself. This was the moment I stopped hoping for external help and started planning to take control. How could I Corrine Hayes, a single grandmother, force action where police and management had failed? Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The path from rock bottom wasn't easy, but my resolve was now as hard as granite. I realized I couldn't just keep reacting. I had to become proactive. My experience from years ago, the one that had forced me to leave my previous home, now served as a bitter mentor. I knew the management's weak points, their apathy, their legalistic loopholes, and I knew with absolute certainty that Mrs. Gable's behavior went far beyond simple nuisance. It was a calculated campaign of harassment, and the apartment complex, by its inaction, was enabling it. This time, my vengeance would be methodical, patient, and above all, overwhelming. My first step was to become an expert on tenant law, housing regulations, and corporate liability. I spent hours at the public library poring over legal texts and online databases. I learned about nuisance clauses, health and safety codes, and the responsibilities of landlords. I researched the corporate structure of our apartment complex, identifying regional managers, legal departments, and even their parent company. If Mr. Henderson wouldn't listen, I would go over his head, then over theirs, until I found someone who would. My resourcefulness was fully engaged. I began compiling a dossier that would make a lawyer proud. My meticulously kept logbook was just the beginning. I printed out every single Blink camera notification, every video clip of Mrs. Gable's brazen acts, including the infamous Halloween incident, complete with timestamps and brief descriptions. I took photographs of the illegally parked cars, the homeless encampments in her spot, the trash accumulating near her door. I even purchased an inexpensive air quality monitor to detect the persistent smoke in my bathroom, logging the readings as irrefutable proof of the non-smoking policy violation. This was not just evidence, it was an airtight case. I also reached out to the few neighbors who had shared their own stories of Mrs. Gable's behavior. I framed it not as a personal vendetta, but as a collective effort to reclaim our peace. My empathetic approach resonated. A quiet woman named Brenda, who lived directly above Mrs. Gable and had been driven nearly mad by the constant noise, agreed to sign an affidavit detailing the disturbances. Another family, tired of the parking chaos, provided statements and photographs of their own. Building these alliances was crucial. It transformed my isolated struggle into a communal stand. My plan involved a multi-pronged assault designed to hit the management company where it hurt, their reputation and their legal exposure. First, I drafted a certified letter addressed not just to Mr. Henderson, but to the regional manager, the corporate legal department, and even the CEO of the parent company. This letter wasn't a complaint. It was a formal notice of legal action detailing every breach of lease, every nuisance, and crucially, management's repeated failure to address them. I cited specific lease clauses, local ordinances, and documented instances. I included a heavily redacted for privacy screenshot from the Halloween video, highlighting the brazen theft and disgusting public indecency, leaving just enough detail to spark outrage without compromising personal privacy. I made it clear that their inaction was a breach of their own contractual obligations, and that I was prepared to pursue legal remedies, including but not limited to escrowing my rent and filing a lawsuit for damages and an injunction. This was my patient vengeance, delivered in a professional, devastating package. Next, I filed complaints with every relevant municipal authority. The health department received a detailed report about the persistent smoke and the unsanitary conditions caused by the unsanctioned parking lot encampments. The city's code enforcement department received a report about the parking violations and the unapproved residents. Each complaint was accompanied by a condensed version of my dossier, designed to be easily digestible but powerfully persuasive. Then came the execution. I mailed the certified letters, tracking each one, knowing they would land on the desks of people far more influential than Mr. Henderson. I followed up on the municipal complaints, making sure they were processed and assigned. The waiting period was excruciating, a test of my already frayed patience. But I knew this wasn't an overnight battle. I had cultivated patience for years, and now it was my greatest weapon. The first ripple effect came from the corporate office. Within a week, I received a frantic call from Mr. Henderson, his voice devoid of its usual nonchalance. "Mrs. Hayes, we've received your letter. A regional manager will be coming down next Tuesday to discuss this in person. They're quite concerned." The shift in his demeanor was palpable. My strategy was working. The meeting with the regional manager, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Albright, was a tense affair. I brought Brenda with me for moral support and to corroborate some of the noise complaints. I laid out my case, presenting the full, unredacted dossier: the videos, the photographs, the air quality readings, the signed affidavits. I watched Ms. Albright's face blanch as the Halloween video played, her professional composure cracking when Mrs. Gable's bare buttocks flashed across the screen. This is simply unacceptable," Ms. Albright stammered, visibly shaken. "Why was this not addressed sooner, Mr. Henderson?" Her gaze, sharp and accusatory, swung to the property manager, who squirmed uncomfortably. We lacked sufficient evidence," he mumbled, but the words withered under Ms. Albright's stare. "You had direct video evidence of theft and public indecency," she retorted, then turned back to me, her voice softening slightly. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Please accept my sincerest apologies. This level of negligence is appalling. We will take immediate action." And they did. The very next day, Mrs. Gable received a formal eviction notice, citing multiple serious breaches of her lease, backed by my comprehensive evidence. Mrs. Gable, true to form, initially denied everything, then erupted in a furious tirade, banging on my door and shrieking accusations. But this time I was ready. I simply recorded her outburst on my phone, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. The eviction process was not swift, but it was relentless. Mrs. Gable hired a lawyer, claiming harassment and discrimination, but my evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. The parking violations were documented by multiple neighbors. The smoking was proven by my air quality monitor and multiple tenant complaints. The thefts were caught on camera. And the Halloween video, particularly the public indecency aspect, was a legal and public relations nightmare for the apartment complex, forcing their hand. Court proceedings were grueling, but my composure never wavered. I presented my case calmly, factually, letting the undeniable evidence speak for itself. 3 months after that fateful Halloween, the grand payoff arrived. The court ruled decisively in the apartment complex's favor, ordering Mrs. Gable's immediate eviction. I watched from my window, a quiet sense of triumph swelling in my chest, as uniformed officers and movers escorted a furious, screaming Mrs. Gable from her apartment. Her belongings, meager and disheveled, were carted away. The silence that settled over the hallway afterward was profound, a sacred quiet that I hadn't realized how much I'd missed. Lily, oblivious to the drama, simply commented, "Grandma, it's so quiet today." Her innocent words were the sweetest music. The consequences for Mrs. Gable were severe. Not only was she evicted, her lawyer withdrew from the case, and I heard through the grapevine that her public indecency on the Halloween video, though not pursued legally, had been leaked and widely circulated among the property management community, ensuring she would find it difficult to rent anywhere reputable again. For the apartment complex, my actions led to a shakeup. Mr. Henderson was quietly transferred to another property, and Ms. Albright implemented new, stricter policies for handling tenant complaints, with clear accountability measures. The complex, in an unprecedented move, sent out a newsletter detailing their renewed commitment to tenant safety and well-being, tacitly acknowledging the previous failures. The biggest twist, though, came a few weeks later. Brenda, my upstairs neighbor, stopped me in the hall, her face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Corrine," she whispered, "you wouldn't believe what I heard. That Mrs. Gable, she pulled this exact same stunt with at least 3 other tenants in our unit before you. Drove them all out with her chaos, and management just let it happen. You're the first one who ever truly fought back and won." My motivation, my deep kinship with the current victim's plight, suddenly made full, horrifying sense. I hadn't just fought for myself and Lily. I had broken a cycle, avenging those nameless past tenants who had been forced to surrender their homes. Justice, true and complete, had finally been served in Oakmont. The peace was not just restored, it was earned. I walked into my bathroom that evening, took a deep breath, and inhaled clean, untainted air. The hum of the dishwasher was back to being the loudest sound. Lily was sleeping soundly, dreaming of unicorns instead of monsters next door. Our sanctuary was safe, forever changed by the battle, but stronger for it. This was my home, and no one would ever drive me from it again. This was a true victory, a testament to what patience and persistence, fueled by a healthy dose of vengeance, could achieve. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily.